Hey, I'm Sarah, and this is the Goddess in Training podcast. This isn't about being perfect or polished or having it all figured out. This is about what happens when you actually start listening to your body, your intuition, your patterns, your truth. I'm asking big questions and having real conversations, sometimes messy and sometimes magical, with people who've lived through it, grown through it, and still don't have all the answers. If you've ever doubted yourself, betrayed your gut, or wondered if you're the only one, you're not. Let's talk about it. Welcome back to another episode of Goddess in Training. I'm Sarah, and today I'm joined by someone I've known for well over a decade, Tamara Pincus. Tamara is a licensed clinical social worker and certified sex therapist who has dedicated her career to serving communities that are too often misunderstood or marginalized. People who are polyamorous, kinky, LGBTQI+, neurodiverse, and more. She founded the Pincus Center for Inclusive Treatment and Education, where authenticity, body positivity, and radical acceptance are at the heart of the work. In our conversation, Tamara shares her journey into sex therapy, how her own lived experiences inform her practice, and the ways kink, polyamory, and sacred sexuality can be pathways to both healing and empowerment. We also talk about authenticity, jealousy, consent, the next generation, and how pleasure itself can be a tool for resilience and resistance in difficult times. This is a conversation about courageously living your truth, creating spaces where people can show up fully as themselves, and reimagining intimacy as a source of growth and joy. Let's dive in. Welcome back to another episode of Goddess in Training. I am Sarah, and I am here today with Tamara Pincus, who I've known for more than a minute. Tamara, I think we met each other, I don't know if I want to say, maybe like 10, 15 years ago, a really long time. And I have just always really admired the growth of your practice and the resources that you provide to these communities that are in desperate need of mental health services and are often marginalized. And so thank you. Thank you for what you do. And I'm just so happy to have you here to talk about intuition and how it intersects with the populations that you serve and also in your own life. So thank you.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
So tell me how you got started as a sex therapist and especially serving communities like people who are polyamorous or kinky or LGBTQI plus individuals. How did that all start for you?
So I was thinking about maybe doing therapy. I was out of college. I was doing little things here and there, like working in a residential program for teenagers and working at the Jewish Community Center. And my parents, being my parents, were like, you need to see a career counselor because you need to go to graduate school. And so I go in with like a little bit of attitude because I'm like, I'm in my 20s. Why are my parents telling me what to do? And the woman asked me, what do you like to do? And I was like, I'd like to talk about sex. And she was like, well, you could do that. And so that's really where I got started. I found a local sex therapist in the DC area. I interviewed her about how she got to where she was. I followed her path pretty directly, which I'm not sure was the greatest choice. Catholic University was not for me.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah. Not a good fit. And then, yeah, so I did that and I finished school and there were no jobs in sex therapy and you can't really go out on your own when you finish school. So I worked in public mental health for 7 years and didn't really do anything around sexuality there except for every once in a long while. I'm fundamentally insubordinate, so I was going to get fired, I'm pretty sure. So I was like, I guess it's time to start my private practice. And so I did. I opened a private practice. I started in a rent an office by the hour kind of place. And I figured out what classes I needed to take to get my sex therapy certification. And I found a supervisor for that. And I started doing it. You know, as far as like queer and poly and kink communities, like those were my communities. And I knew how hard it was to find a therapist who would understand me. And I knew what it was like to be in therapy and feel like you couldn't talk about large swaths of your life. So I thought that I was going to try to be a generalist for a little while. 2 or 3 months after I opened my practice, I was at this therapist mixer for the Greater Washington Society for Clinical Social Work. And I'm talking to this woman who I don't know that well. And I happened to mention both my husband and my boyfriend in my description of what happened over the weekend. And then I was like, oh, so I just outed myself as polyamorous. And then I found out that that woman was the president of the Greater Washington Society for Clinical Social Work. And she was like, you should write an article and you should teach a class. So I did those things.
Wow.
Um, that's really how I became sort of the go-to therapist for those things in the DC area. There was one other therapist doing that at the time who I did track down and talk to. That was in 2011 when polyamory was a word that very few people knew. Things have really changed since then. There's a lot more people practicing in the area, some of whom really know their stuff, some of whom took one class.
They're an expert.
So now
They
that's
went to some parties, took a class. I know everything now.
right. Right. So yeah.
Talk a little bit more about authenticity, because what I heard you say is two things that really resonated with me is outing yourself, which is something that I do all the time. I don't think I have the ability to keep things in and filter myself for different audiences. And I think you also mentioned just knowing, even at a young age, that you just love to talk about sex. Talk a little bit more about just who you are deep down as a person and what role authenticity plays in your own life.
I mean, I don't know who else I would be if it wasn't me. I've always been a person who's very loud and out. Like in high school, I came out as bi and I was doing a lot of LGBT activism stuff. I was like, putting posters up all over school. We started a group in my high school. We weren't allowed to start a queer group because it was, the 90s and they were conservative. So we started Students for Human Rights.
I love that.
But we were, doing a lot of things, going to the pride parades in Buffalo where I lived. And yeah, and then I went to college and I kept just being my loud self. And I helped start a kink group while I was there to sort of build kink community because I think that's really important. There are some things you can't teach yourself at home by yourself. Like you really need a person. So yeah. And I'm still just really loud about who I am. It's awkward at school events. It's getting easier now that the kids are older, but like, when you're going to like the meet up with the other preschool moms and they're like, what do you do? And I'm like, I'm a sex therapist. You either get stunned silence or you get sort of like pulling you aside for questions. But I've never really been able to hide myself and I haven't tried. I know I'm not the person for everybody. I do make other people uncomfortable sometimes with my directness for sure.
That's how people grow. Unconsensual growth by pushing yourself on people. I'd have a tendency to do that. Kind of the trigger warning thing, like maybe a trigger warning t-shirt sometimes. Yeah, like something might come out of my mouth that might make you feel uncomfortable, but maybe that's a good thing. Talk a little bit more about kink, because that's the context through which we met. I was in the kink community for a long time and I've since gotten out of it. Not because I didn't enjoy it, I thoroughly did, and I've written a lot about my experiences there and the amount that I grew in those communities, and just the wonderful friends that I met too. One thing that I just really appreciate about the kink community is the diversity of people, and again, that authenticity that people bring with them. I think people in general are just like, this is who I am. And they're also open and willing to have deep conversations that you wouldn't have with the preschool moms. And I just appreciated that so much and still have so many friends who are still in that world. So talk a little bit about your journey there and how it intersects with therapy and healing, because maybe at first didn't know that I was utilizing kink as a way to heal myself, but in retrospect, I definitely was.
Yeah. I mean, I've been involved with the kink community for a long time. I sort of thought after I got out of college that I would just sort of pursue it in my own relationships. I found my way back to the kink community in about 2009. I started going to play parties and stuff. But then, I started my own practice the same year that I went to Winter Fire for the first time. And I also went to like a Beltane event and like I was learning all of this stuff about polyamory. I was opening my marriage. I was like opening a practice at the same time. And so, like, for a few years there, I was, like, really pretty involved with the kink community, and I would go to Winterfire every year, and I would try to present. But it's also this complication being a licensed therapist,
Mm.
because obviously you can't have sex with your clients. If a client walks in on you while you're in the dungeon, what does that even mean, right? And how
Yeah.
does a licensure board look at that? I know a lot of people who they're like, I'm just going to live my life. And I think that's fair. And I am not willing to give up my life of public kink entirely. But also, I was in clinical supervision with somebody who was kind of horrified by by that. So, um if you're not a therapist, the process of clinical supervision is you have to go in and talk about your cases, and they're teaching you about how to do sex therapy ethically. And like they're coming from an older generation of different sort of world around these things. So I ended up sort of backing away from the kink community in a lot of ways. So I've still kept going to like smaller events or events that are out of town. But most of the kink stuff I do is like in my own space with my people. And at this point, if I am going to do something in the kink world, like I have a FetLife account with my work persona, my business headshot and my actual name, and I will RSVP with that. So if clients or former clients are going to come, they're going to know that I'm going to be there, right? So it's not going to be as much of a surprise.
That makes sense.
Yeah. But it is complex to negotiate. I don't feel open to be my authentic self if a client is in the room. And if I'm worried a client is going to walk into the room, same problem.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense though.
Mhm.
And a delicate dance because you want to be there and also let the community know that you're there as a resource, and you want to live your own life. Talk a little bit more about the role that kink has played in your own healing journey, if it has at all. If not, then no. But and what kinds of things your clients discover, of course, anonymously through kink.
I mean, I think kink is certainly a thing that I have used to work through some of my stuff. I think a lot of kink is about working through past traumas and fears and playing with those things so we can have more power over them. I think that's true for most people. Like, I got a lot out of the kink world for a long time. I feel like I'm less there now. I was in a DDLG relationship for 9 years.
What's DDLG?
Daddy little girl.
Yeah, thank.
And then my daddy started going to church in secret and converted to Catholicism. And then he announced that he was not kinky, not polyamorous, and not bisexual anymore. So I have some traumas there I'm still working through.
Interesting. Wow, that's like a huge shift.
It was a huge shift. So I think that really shifted my relationship to kink in a lot of ways, because that relationship was so foundational to where I was coming at kink from at that time. I'm still polyamorous. I still have relationships that are kinky, but I think it's a lot less central to my life.
Mhm. Yeah, that's how I feel about it too. I dabbled in dominant submissive stuff, and I've written about how using rope and putting myself in physically submissive situations helped me learn how to meditate actually and connect because I was able to turn off the noise of the world, and that was really really therapeutic for me. But then I stopped needing that and craving that so much, and then just life shifted, I shifted and shifted into other things. Definitely did not become Catholic, not that much of a shift away from that. That's like night
I
and
mean,
day.
we were doing a lot of hypnosis in that relationship. So I certainly learned how to shift my state in a lot of ways through that context of that relationship. And I don't think we didn't really even know at the time that we were doing it that hypnosis was what was happening. And I had what some people call like a tantric awakening and other people call the onset of persistent genital arousal disorder in the context of that. So I went through a period where everything would make me orgasm. It was really awkward. So like I could go to the gym and work out and I would orgasm or and not have control over it. Now I have control over it.
Wow.
But like that that was a real shift in my experience of the world. I also think that I've had some really profoundly healing experiences on the other side, being being a dom, I have, I would say kind of a goddess acolyte dynamic with a submissive who I've been seeing for 7 years now, but also we dated before and we broke up for that. And I think that that has really helped me learn how to really embrace power and has, helped me really learn how to be happy in my body, which I'm not able to do all the time, but some of the time is better than none of the time. And as a super fat person who's really marginalized around that, it's been incredibly helpful.
Yeah, I mean, to experience worship is like, I also have body image issues. And when I have experienced that sensation of somebody like worshiping you, it's like it kind of turns something in my own brain like, I deserve this. I deserve this as much as anybody else. And then was able to start triggering that in my own brain for that own kind of self love too.
Hmm. Yeah.
Being in this world for so long, what are some misconceptions about polyamory and kink that are out there that you feel like you always have to dispel or correct?
Oh, I feel like one of the big ones is that everybody who's into polyamory is like into triads. I find this all the damn time. I got in an argument with another therapist about it because she was going to teach a class on polyamory, and the first thing she was going to talk about was triads. And I was like, that is a thing that happens, and it's much more rare than all of these other kinds of relationships. So, what are you doing? And I also still find it, I don't know, when I'm on dating apps, I still get like, I wanna be in a polyamorous triad with you, and I'm like, "I haven't met you or your partner. I
Right.
don't know if I'm interested in you. I certainly don't know if I'm interested in both of you." One person at a time is hard enough, man. Oh.
Yeah, I have rarely ever seen that work really well. I
I
like
mean,
to
I've
have
only seen it
three
really
people.
work when that was not a plan.
Right,
Like,
right.
it's easier for somebody to find themselves falling in love with 2 people at the same time than it is for them to, like, sort of script that and walk into it.
Exactly.
Like,
Yeah.
life just does not conform to the scripts we have in our head. So, that's been one. I think the idea that polyamorous people don't experience jealousy or that they shouldn't is one that, like, really bugs me. I think everybody experiences jealousy. Certainly, monogamous people are not immune from jealousy. What are we talking about? We all have jealousy. We all need to learn how to deal with it without, like, burning our lives down. Like, come on, guys. So that's a thing. I think the idea that polyamorous people are, like, only ever thinking about sex. I mean, I think about sex all the time, but it's also my job. Most people have a lot of other shit going on. So I think that's the thing I come across. I think that the stereotype about kinky people is that they're just weird, and I do think there's sort of like a hierarchy of kinks that we don't talk about. So, like, there's the sort of normaler kinks, which are like relationships with dominant men and submissive women, and then they're more represented, and you see a lot of tying up and beating, but you don't tend to see some of the other kinks represented as much in the kinky spaces. Like, you don't see the ABDLs or the furries as much in the big kink conferences. They have to have their own little conference off to the side, which is great that they have that space, and I'm glad that they're doing that now. But I do feel like we talk about the kinks community like it's one community, but I think it's really segmented in a lot of ways. I think the another thing we don't really talk about is the intersection of kink and polyamory and neurodiversity. I think that if you're looking at the Venn diagram, there's just an insane amount of overlap that we don't talk about. And I would love to see somebody like do a survey of like just people who show up to the kink community and how many of them have ADHD or autism. I mean, and probably a lot of people with autism have no idea they have it because that's a thing. Um,
Mhm,
so yeah.
mhm. Yeah, yeah, and, like, maybe I don't know, I'm not sure what the reasons would be for that the Venn diagram in terms of that, though. Do you have any theories?
Theory, I have a couple of theories. I think for one, once you're outside of the box, you're outside of the box.
Mm,
You're already, if you're neurodivergent person, you're not following the life path that a lot of other people are following. You tend to have your first relationship older, uh and it's harder sometimes for people who are neurodivergent to like negotiate relationships based on the sort of like implied, we're going to follow this path that like heteronormative romantic relationships follow. Whereas if you go into the kink community, you can specifically talk about like, I want to do this thing. And the
Mhm.
expectation is that you're going to talk about it and there's not going to be like, you should psychically know. So I think that's incredibly helpful for people who are sort of spectrumy. I think that I'm trying to remember of the name, but the guy from Touch of Flavor did a presentation or a podcast about the intersection of ADHD and polyamory. But it seems to me also that, like, if you're a person who's like distracted a lot, it's easier for you to be distracted by the new hot person. And if you are distracted by the new hot person, like, and you're in a monogamous context, that can really blow up all your relationships.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, if you're in a polyamorous context, you can still have those relationships with the new hot people. If you're doing a good job of it, you can also keep the other existing relationships going in a healthy place. So I think that like sort of explains, at least for him and probably some people, like how their ADHD plays into polyamory. And I also think for autistic people, the reason you're only supposed to love one person is just because it's a societal rule, right? It's not that you only ever are attracted to one person. Like, I don't think we think that people are only ever attracted to one person. So I just think it on its face for a lot of autistic people, monogamy doesn't make sense.
I think for most people, when you really think about it, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense because it's just inherently shutting down parts of yourself, being like, well, I can't even look or think about or fantasize about other things because we're told to have our blinders on and commit to one person for our entire lives. Let's talk a little bit about jealousy because I love what you said that it's not something that can be transcended. And I feel like a lot of polyamorous people are like, well, I just don't feel jealous anymore. And my relationship with jealousy changed as I was in open relationships, but it never goes away. And I'm a firm believer that all relationships are mirrors. And I feel like jealousy is one of those emotions that we feel that can, if we're introspective and we're willing to look at it, really allow us to look inward and like, where is this coming from and why am I feeling this way? How has it shown up in your own life and in the people that you serve?
I mean, I think it shows up a lot in all kinds of things. I think that I've yet to meet the person who had the perfect relationship with their parents, who got all the love and attention that they needed. Maybe they exist out there. I don't know them. And so I feel like there are places where we have these gaps and they show up all over the place. And it's not necessarily what you would think. Like with my ex-husband, I would get jealous if he would fix something at somebody else's house, but I wouldn't care if he slept with other people. Whereas my current partner, if he sleeps with other people, sometimes I get a little bit of an inkling. But I'm also like, I feel like it's better if that happens than if that never happens, because I seem to have more access to other partners than he does in a lot of ways. I think that jealousy is something that we should plan for. So, one of the things that I do with clients who are in the process of opening up relationships is to really talk about emotional care plans. Like, what
Mhm.
is your plan for your partner starts going out on dates with other people? How are you going to take care of each other? What are the things that you guys need to reconnect? Also, remember that it's not just the person who did not go on the date that needs support. Because I think there's a lot of slut shaming culturally, and that people can feel like, you know, I just went on this date with this other person and I'm in this relationship. And even though they said it was okay, what if it's not really okay? What if they're going to get mad at me and leave me now? What if I'm going to be punished for this in some way? And so I think both people often end up needing support at that time. And I think we should plan for what it's going to be and a time for it to happen, as opposed to being like, when jealousy happens, we'll figure it out. When it happens, for a lot of time, it's a really intense emotion. It's big feelings. It is not like, I'm a little bothered. So
Mhm.
you really have to plan for big comfort things. Plan for snuggles, plan for quality time, whatever the thing is.
Yeah, affirmations, things like that. Trying to think of the times when I felt the most jealous. That resonates. The sometimes it's the things that you wish you were getting, but you're not getting in the relationship. And so like I really need stuff fixed around the house. And but my partner went and you did that for somebody else, not me. Yeah, like I could definitely yeah, but like actual sex, it's interesting that I think was farther down my list of things that were triggering in terms of jealousy. And with my ex-husband, if I did something even unknowingly that he had at some point wanted to do with me and hadn't yet done with me, that was a big trigger for jealousy. And so it's really complex. And when I was new to it, definitely did not have that care plan put in place. There was not that intentionality around it. So are you seeing a higher rate of couples kind of coming into this looking to prepare with some intentionality?
I mean, I feel like people who come to see me as part of this process are looking to prepare with intentionality. Like, I feel like the people who don't have any intentionality about it just sort of like, walk
Come to
into
you
it.
after the fact.
Yeah. Yeah. They come later. Yeah. But I don't usually see people. I mean, you occasionally get it with somebody who's really impulsive, who they're like, I'm thinking about polyamory. They make one appointment, they come in one time, and then like, oops, they ended up running out on a date the next week. It happens. And then we have to look at why impulsively.
Uh-huh.
Can we
Uh-huh.
do this deliberately? Yeah.
Uh-huh. One thing that I felt when I was in open relationships, polyamory, it's hard and it's time consuming. And I felt like the rate at which past wounds were opened up was much higher than if I was not in these relationships, if I was not exploring things with other people. Why do you think people choose or would not choose to put themselves under that kind of stress in their relationships?
I feel like they're not just choosing the stress, they're also choosing pleasure and joy. So, like, I think if it was just stress, nobody would do it. But I do think that people really enjoy having multiple loving relationships, feeling loved on that deep level by multiple people. And I think that some people are in it for the like, I'm going to learn things about myself that I wouldn't otherwise learn. So I think that is factor for some people. I don't think it makes sense to do if you're not prepared to learn things you didn't really want to know about, like the ways in which your childhood and adolescence fucked you up. Like if you don't want to know that, like, memory is not for you.
Yeah, it's hard to, again, like pick the kind of relationship that will avoid those kinds of things coming up. I've been reading a lot recently about sacred sexuality. And it was interesting what you said about licensing issues because I've been reading about people who have been undergoing sex therapy that actually includes being touched by their therapist. I'm guessing it's some kind of therapy that is outside of that which is licensed. Do you know anything about that and different kinds of sex therapy? Yeah.
Do you? So there's a bunch of different ways that that happens. So for one, if you're seeing a sex therapist who's a licensed talk therapist, like a social worker, psychology, whatever, they can work with a surrogate partner. I've done this a few times where, I see the person for talk therapy. The surrogate partner sees them in a way that's not just about, you get this message that's like, we're going to just have sex with them. No, it's like whole process of learning how relationships work. So they start from going on dates and like light touch and then saying maybe a few weeks later. And then it might work all the way up to intercourse if there's an idea that this also puts us on the like hierarchy of sex thing, which I also have feelings about. But they might go to other things and they might not. And then we have what they call triadic meetings where the talk therapist and the surrogate partner and the client all meet together to talk about how things are going. The talk therapist is always in communication with the surrogate partner about how those things are going along and what do we need to talk about in therapy. And so there is a place for that. It's not impossible. I think we have this idea that sex work is illegal, so that can never happen. But it's not really directly sex work. And as far as the people that I know have heard surrogate partners have never been prosecuted for sex work. I think because every time cops go to surrogate partners to do their thing where they try to entrap you, it takes them too long. You're not willing
Yeah.
to keep going for 6 months and talk about their feelings in their relationship and get to that point.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a thing. There's
That's
also
fascinating.
there's also
Yeah.
psychological body workers
Right.
who, they keep their clothes on, but they do touch with clients that is engaged around causing sexual pleasure and getting people to sort of learn what pleasure looks like in their body. I think that kind of work can also be incredibly powerful for clients. So that is a thing that I would recommend to people. I think there's a lot of workshop spaces you can go to where people will teach you basic tantra stuff. And, I've been to a lot of pujas and other sort of tantric rituals where you can go in, you can bring a partner or not, you can do paired exercises with people, you learn these deeper connection techniques. It's not led by a therapist. And there's also sex coaches. And sex coaches coaches can do anything, right? Like that,
Right.
like there are sex coaches who will just talk to you about stuff. There are sex coaches who will be in the room with you while you have sex with other people. There are sex coaches, like they'll do all kinds of things. And the line between that and sex work, assuming we think sex work is a bad thing, I don't know what the line is. But I mean, I think there's all kinds of people doing all kinds of work around helping people engage sexually and engage the intersection of spirituality and sexuality. I believe that sex is one of the ways that we can really experience altered states of consciousness and like a connection to the whole and, very spiritual experiences. I believe that that is one of the reasons that religion is so sex negative, because they want to be your only conduit to those spiritual experiences.
Mhm.
So I think a lot of what culture has known about the power of sexuality has been shoved underground. And then the little pockets where it pops up is that like people go to workshops to have these powerful sexual experiences, and they do, and they'll be very floaty. And that is also a space where there's been a lot of people in power in the Tantra community who've taken advantage of that and
Mm.
sexually engaged with people in a way that's not fully consensual. Like when you are the Tantra guru is also a culturally appropriative word. When you are that person and you bring somebody in and you show them what orgasmic meditation can look like, and you show them how to access all this pleasure in their body that they didn't know was possible, it is very easy for somebody in that position to take advantage of that. So I think for your listeners, like you want to be really careful about where you go and who's in charge and what are their policies around consent, what are their policies around safety, what is the policy around whether instructors engage with students or not. Because I think that's really key. I think those violations have really kept us from the kind of movement we could have as helping people engage with this kind of pleasure on a larger scale, because people have crossed those boundaries. But it's really tempting when you're holding that power of you have a group of like 50 hot people who think you're a sex god. You have to be like, sorry, no.
I got a little bit uncomfortable in situations in the kink community along those lines as well. I will say, overall, the kink community is very, very consent conscious. And I would say the vast majority of people talk a lot about consent and, have a lot of those conversations and make sure that they happen before anybody gets into that floaty headspace where they may not be able to consent in a full way. But there were definitely blurry lines. Talk a little bit about your experiences there and the balance of consent and personal responsibility, because I also felt like the lines were blurred there, that sometimes you're putting yourself in a situation where if you're being tied up, like I always went into that situation knowing the inherent danger in that and not assuming that the person tying me up would have full responsibility for anything that happened beyond that point. Like, that was all me, 100% me. I stepped into that. I had the conversation or lack of conversation beforehand, and so then what transpired was on me. But then, but then things can happen where somebody then takes advantage of you in that situation where then it is not your personal responsibility. Talk about that balance and these important conversations that happen all the time. And I think that it just the fact that they're being talked about is a really positive thing.
I think it has been a really huge shift, that people have really been talking about consent in the kink community. I would say about 9 or 10 years ago, there was a group of us who were going to different kink conferences and sexuality conferences in general and talking about boundary violations in the kink community and what a restorative justice approach would look like as opposed to a punitive, like, oh, somebody says you did this thing, we're never going to allow you in a space again and we're not going to talk to you about it, kind of approach. And I organized an event at the Baltimore Playhouse, and we invited Andy Eisenson down to talk about restorative justice in the kink community and how, people can work together to talk about, okay, so here's where it went wrong and what will we do differently and how can we as a community make this place safer. And I think that, it hasn't been going on that long. Like when I got into the community in the late 90s, like that was not a conversation we were having at all. And I will tell you the story. So what happened after that for me was I had done all of this work and speaking around consent stuff. I mean, not a huge amount, but like a few different talks. And I'd worked with clients in these situations. And then I was assaulted by somebody that I was seeing. We had made an agreement that we were going to do a take a bath together, and then he gives me a massage scene. And we got out of the bathtub, and I laid down, and he beat the shit out of me. And I froze. So one of the things we don't talk about in these spaces is the normal responses to trauma. So like, what you have usually is fight or flight, freeze or fawn. Most people are going to have like freeze and fawn. So they're going to not be able to move or not be able to talk, or when they are able to talk, they're going to do anything they can to placate that person that they see as dangerous. So they want that person to see them well, and and on an unconscious level, they are being incredibly nice to that person, right? You see this used in legal contexts to say that whatever happened was a consent violation. So if somebody is raped and then they let the person sleep over, it's looked at like, well, you didn't kick them out. Obviously, you were really okay with it. Whereas what actually happens is that your sense is that I'm in danger, and the way to get myself out of danger is to make this person see me as positively as possible.
Exactly.
So anyway, to sort of go back a step, so I had this experience of being assaulted by somebody who I knew in the kink community and who had used other people that I knew who held power in the kink community as kink references. Like I literally was like, who do you know that I would know that does this kind of kink stuff that we do? And then I ran into one of those people in person and I said, this thing happened to me. And she was like, my God, I'm so sorry that happened. Let's get together and talk about it. I'll have a talk with him. We'll make sure if we're ever in kink spaces together that he's doing a better job and blah, blah, blah. And so like I sat down with her and I talked with her for like an hour about the experience. And she said to me, if you had had self-defense training, this wouldn't have happened.
Boy.
So, and she's like an older woman who came out in the kink scene in a space where we were not talking about consent that way. And she just didn't get it. And at that point, like she wasn't like running like regular play parties, which she was when I had first gotten to know her. But yeah. So that's why I don't do activism around that anymore. Like I just
Yeah.
am like, yeah, can't. But I do think that like the people who are out there now trying to do that work, they're still there. And people are still trying to work on how to do restorative justice. And that some people are not open to a restorative justice process. Some people are just not willing to admit that they've made mistakes and they're not willing to work on it and they're not willing to go to therapy or take classes on consent or whatever. And I feel like if people are accusing you of consent violations and you're not willing to work on it, then you're not a safe person. I think when people accuse you of a consent violation and you are willing to work on it, that there should be some process for that. And what I've seen with people who've gone through that process is that there's no framework for it. They have to do all the internal work of how do I manage the fact that somebody feels like I violated their consent. My God, now I'm a rapist. What the fuck is wrong with me? And so there's a lot of work to do in therapy around that. But then, like, even after you get to the other side of that and you're like, okay, here's where the wires got crossed. Here's where the understanding around consent got lost. Here's what I can do next time to do different. There's not a clear way of like how to get back into the kink world after that. Because once you have a reputation as being like the bad person, how can you ever come back to being seen as just neutral? And I think a lot of times what happens with people, either people just leave entirely and they never come back, or they go to another city and they start their own thing. And sometimes when they go to their own another city and start their own thing, they haven't done any of the work at all. So I think that's a thing to keep an eye out for as well.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I've definitely seen that, and then I have seen people take time off and come back into the community, and w I was unaware of whether work had been done or not, but I think time had passed and, they were clearly allowed to go back to events, and I didn't hear specifically about how that went after they went back to events, but it's a tough thing to manage, especially when it's a community. There's nobody in charge. There's no governing body, and like there would be complications with governing bodies as well, and power dynamics, and so it's really this microcosm of kind of trial and error and figuring out how to maneuver situations like this. It's been fascinating, kind of like the sociologist side of me, watching the kink community go through these iterations and conversations, and have just so much gratitude to the people who, like you, who stepped up in the forefront and to try to solve these complex problems.
Yeah. I mean, I do still sort of deal with it just with my munch. So I run a monthly polyamory munch. It's called Nerdy and Flirty. It's the munch for polyamorous nerds. But one of the things I've seen there is, we just are hanging out fully clothed in a restaurant. And sometimes people will be like, this person makes me uncomfortable. And so you have to look into like why this person makes you uncomfortable. And a lot of times with that, it's just people with autism who don't read social cues well. So they'll be talking to people who don't really want to be talking to them and they don't know. So that's a whole other thing. And how do you tell when somebody doesn't want to talk to you if they're not going to tell you? And also, like, to what extent is your responsibility if somebody's talking to you to you don't want to talk to you to like say something?
Right.
Like, it, yeah.
Yeah,
If
yeah.
you call me a week later, what am I going to do?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's where like the personal responsibility is like, you have the ability to get up and move your seat too in a situation like that.
Right,
Yeah.
but you might also have a freeze response, like, if you have a history of sexual assault, like, and this person reminds you of that person or something comes up for you, you might have a freeze response, and I think that's the other thing, like, you can be having a trauma response, and the person you're with doesn't necessarily know. So
Yeah.
they don't necessarily know you've gotten to a point where you can't say word because you're frozen. And they don't necessarily know that you're being nice to them because you're having a fawn response. And so you can feel like, I was having a trauma response. How could they not know they fucked up? And the other person could be like, you looked totally normal and you said everything was fine. So,
And so, yeah, and that's where there's just so much risk in these kinds of engagements, because somebody can go in with all of the best intentions, like I am going to textbook, have the consent conversation, check in really really frequently during a scene, but still just not be able to recognize the signs in somebody and cross some boundary that somebody isn't able to vocalize. And so there's just that inherent risk in doing it that can't be 100% avoided. Yeah. I'm curious to hear your perspective on the next generation. Our kids are around the same age. In a world where it's easy to be depressed about the future, I see so much hope in the teenagers and the young kids coming up right now, because they, at least my experience, they're so much more open to having these conversations, and they're not closed off, and their minds are open to so many more possibilities for their future than I feel like I had when I was that age, and it's kind of exciting. How do you feel about the generalizations about the young kids becoming adults?
I mean, I don't know. I feel like my kids are very different from the kids in general at public school.
They grew up talking about sex, which is,
Yeah,
first off.
my kids grew up talking about sex. My older one, my son has 2 trans autistic partners and has occasionally had other friends with benefits and manages all of these relationships incredibly well. I don't know, like, how he does it in a lot of ways for a 19-year-old to be doing that and to be in multiple long-term romantic relationships. That impresses me. And then my daughter, she really grew up in a poly space, and she is autistic, and I just remember this conversation I had with her the other day, and she was like, "Yeah, I don't even understand monogamy." Like, she was like, I don't get why somebody loving somebody means that they can't love me." It sort of blows my mind. So I feel like as far as those things, the kids are doing okay. I interact with very neurodiverse kids, but I hear the stories. So I have a kid living with me who is a trans kid who was not safe at home, so he lives with me. And he goes to public school, and he is still experiencing that sensation of being marginalized around being so
Right.
different. And I feel like a lot of the kids in my spaces are like just really overwhelmed by the world. It's just too many people, too much noise. How am I supposed to be in these spaces? So I don't know how it's going to work out for them. I guess we'll see.
Yeah. I kind of see a lot of traditional institutions falling down and maybe more of a community aspect coming in to our collective world. And I think those would be more supportive spaces for all of us, not just people who get overwhelmed by all of the chaos that's surrounding us.
I mean, I don't think 38 kids in a high school class makes sense ever. Like, why? How are kids going to get enough interaction to really learn what they need to learn?
Yeah.
Really?
There's no way. Now they're taking away their devices too, which I can see the logic behind that. But so many kids have used devices their entire lives to try to drown out all of the 37 other people in the room, right? And then if you take away that coping mechanism, then what are they left with? And like it's just very jarring.
And are they gonna give them another coping mechanism, or are
Right.
they just gonna be like, "Suck it up"?
Yeah.
Like, are they gonna start doing meditation in schools or something to help them get through that shit?
So that
I
takes
mean,
money
and
that they don't have.
yeah. I mean, and my daughter is in this, like, super tiny private school. It's got 38 students, and it's just been incredibly powerful for her, and it's primarily other students who have learning differences or autism and who have school avoidance. They have mostly kids with school avoidance, so they know really well how to deal with, like, the kids who are gonna, like, go hide in the closet during class.
That's amazing. Yeah. Yeah. It's so great to have those resources and they should be available to everyone. So much of this world is just so fucked up. It is easy to get so depressed. But what's bringing you joy right now, Tamara? And what are you looking forward to that's coming up in your life?
My daughter brings me a lot of joy. She's just a fascinating human. We're watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer together, which is a beautiful
Fun.
thing. My partner, Andy, I mean, it just makes me happy to be with him, and living with a partner who I'm really actively in love with is neat, and I haven't done that in a long time. This is bringing me joy. Just people.
Yeah.
So I
People are
feel like for
wonderful.
me, it always comes down to people.
And what about the Pincus Center? Do you have any like innovations coming up? Like anything that you're excited about, new workshops?
So, I mean, we are continuing to add new therapists who are like learning how to do sex therapy with our populations, which is great. And sex therapy can be anything from like, let's talk about this sexual issue to, by the way, I have this obscure kink. Can we talk about how I can focus at work, or I'm depressed because the world is going to shit? What do I do? Those kinds of things. We have a few workshops coming up in the fall. We have groups for people who are in relationships where one partner is monogamous and the other one is ENF,
Mm,
because there's not a lot of resources for those people. and there's a great need for it. We are doing a workshop on how to have great sex in late stage capitalism, which is both about like how do we get into the space of getting out of the world and into having a great sexual space, but also how do we use our sexuality to undo problematic power dynamics that get played out in sex so that our sex can not only be incredibly pleasurable and sort of feed our energy so we can fight the fascism, but also how we can use sexuality to undo these stories we've been told about how sexuality is supposed to work. For instance, I'm just going to use my life. I have a partner who is into cross-dressing, and the sort of idea that you get about cross-dressing is that cross-dressing is something that men do when they want to be humiliated or they want to feel like disempowered. So if you are playing with somebody who's cross-dressing and when they are in their female element, they are dominant. And that allows them to have power as opposed to taking their power away. And what are we doing around what femininity means in that world? Like, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Like, how do you use your sexuality to skew the ways that the world has fucked with your brain?
I love that so much. And I'm just imagining there's so many different ways to go with that. And
Mhm.
it just the creativity and opening people's minds and also play, like we don't play enough and combining the play and the pleasure and stick it to the man. And it just raises the vibration, I think. I think everyone should participate in some kind of workshop like that. That sounds fabulous.
Thanks.
I love that idea.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. This has been so great to catch up and see you and hear about what's been going on in your life. I'm so grateful.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to Goddess in Training. I hope something in this episode stirred your knowing or softened your heart. If it spoke to you, share it with someone who needs it, or leave a review or comment to help others find us. If you're watching on YouTube, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. If you want to hear more conversations like this, please consider supporting Goddess in Training on Patreon. For more tools and offerings to deepen your intuition practice, visit goddessintraining.online. You can also join the Scroll of Sashat on Substack for twice-weekly stories of how I've followed my intuition. The music for Goddess in Training is Madre Ayahuasca by Arkawa, and you can find more of his music in the link to his website in the show notes. Remember, your intuition is not a mystery, it's a memory. Keep listening.
Resplandor de fuego, estrellita, tabaco santo, fuerza de rapel, soplo de luz, soplo encantado, viajecito, bendición del cielo, fortaleza, tigrecito de la selva, madre haya